I don't know if you read obituaries. It's a strange habit, but it's interesting. There was an obituary in the famed obituary newspaper, the New York Times, some years ago. It was from November 25th of 2011, and it was with a photograph of a woman called Olga Bloom. Olga Bloom was 92 years old, but even then, 92 didn't really get you a photograph and part of the obituary section of the New York Times, because thank God, many, many people as we come in this century are living longer and healthier and better lives in their 90s and even beyond. But what was extraordinary about Olga was her life, of course. She was born in 1919. She grew up in Boston. Her father was a Russian immigrant. He was an amateur violinist and an ardent communist. Her mother was a devoted Catholic who worked in factories. Olga started playing the violin when she was age 4. She studied with Jacques Hoffman of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. She played under Leopold Stokowski, and she played extensively under the more familiar to many of you, Leonard Bernstein. What made Olga famous and beloved and worthy of a New York Times obit wasn't how well she played the violin. What made her extraordinary was the fact that in 1975, after her husband died, she mortgaged her Long Island beach home, she borrowed money, and she bought a disused coffee barge. She had it towed to a boatyard on the Rockaways, where it was restored before being moored at Fulton Ferry Landing. Now, New Yorkers here are nodding because those are familiar points, places. Olga created the most unusual space for classical music concerts. Conservatory students and famous professional instrumentalists all played chamber music on her barge. Aside from the fact that it wasn't obviously Carnegie Hall, this wasn't your typical concert venue, what struck me about the story was a detail that was so beautiful and wise and I think appropriate for all of us, particularly on this day of Yom Kippur. Ms. Bloom made the decision deliberately not to moor or stabilize the barge. Just think about that for a second. During the concert, the craft would sway. It would move under the seats of audience members, under the piano, under the pin of the cellist, under the feet of the violinist. When someone, the mayor at the time of New York City, asked her why she didn't put at least the piano on pilings, or if not the whole barge, she said, "I will never put the barge nor the instruments on pilings because beauty, all art, is in some way a way of wrestling with impermanence and death." She said, "I will never put the barge nor the instruments on it on pilings because all beauty, all art is in some ways a wrestling with impermanence and death." Maybe not what you expected. But did you expect that the white that we wear on Yom Kippur has something to do with cleanliness and cleansing, but everything to do with our mortality? Our Orthodox brethren aren't wearing their finery to wear today. They're wearing the simplest kittles. They're wearing literally death shrouds to Yom Kippur services today. It's not because they don't have the best Armani or Gucci or anything else in their closets. It's because they want to make a symbolic decision to wear something that changes their experience of themselves. They want to see themselves as mortal beings. They want to see themselves with an urgency to the words of their prayers. They don't want to be casual about anything that you and I might be casual about. They want in the prayer service of this day to realize that these words matter, that our confessions to God matter, that our conversations with each other matter because they might actually be the last. Because untold and unforeseen illness does come to us. Because the earth does shake and the winds do blow. Because we live fragile lives. We build things around us that make us feel permanent. We reach for the things that will make us feel younger and constantly alive, and yet the reality in our beating heart is that we are preciously, beautifully designed to be preciously and beautifully mortal. infinite in our souls, but not in these, not in our bodies. So imagine this moment of this sermon of this Yom Kippur morning if you knew that this could be your last Yom Kippur. Would it change the direction you would take as you head out the door? Would you pull toward someone closer? Would you say, I'm truly and sincerely sorry. I love you. I care about you. I've neglected to tell you how much you mean to me. I, in all the busyness of my life, my work, and all the things that keep me going constantly, at any age in my life, forget sometimes to find your eyes and your heart and your soul and to connect. We all know those moments. We imagine what it is to be, as you might, as I might, in those morbid, terrifying moments when we hear that an airplane crashed from 10,000 feet above. I told you a story of a woman who survived. She fell 2 miles. And because somehow of the balance of the 3 seats that she sat on, she survived when nobody else did on the flight. But we all ask ourselves, what would we live in those moments? What would it feel like to be plummeting from the heavens knowing that we're going to our obvious demise, death? Who would we think about? Whom would we pray for? Whom would we reach out to? 9/11, do you remember those texts and those calls? Those messages were left that were by people who knew that this was going to be the end of their lives. And what did they do? I presume many things. But one of them was to leave gorgeous, heartfelt, simple, loving words, messages of their hearts that would forever be emblazoned on the hearts of those who received them, causing pain and grief and love and joy that they knew each other and had each other. We race in the opposite direction of conversations about death because it's terrifying. The idea that we won't do and that we might not be. Well, I'll tell you that we are. That's a fundamental Jewish belief, that we will exist. But we may not wear this or that or do the this or that we did yesterday or do today. But ask yourself, when you think about the prayers of this service that talk about mortality, as the beautifully dressed Unetane Tokef does in the morning service, it's beautifully enveloped and dressed in a gorgeous melody, but it's the most harsh prayer of the prayer service. If you look at the entirety of the prayer service that our editors chose to keep out of it because it's too difficult to read, it says that some of us won't be here next year. Flood, fire, sword, pandemic. It says the rabbis have the gall, the temerity, the chutzpah to say some of us, including them, including us, won't be here a year from now, and we know that to be true. I look out not only because it's a time of COVID, there are empty seats, but I know specific seats that are emptied, where people were a year ago and aren't today. Think about our wisdom tradition that teaches us to walk in life. Uvacharta b'chaim, it says in Deuteronomy, and you shall choose life above all, and we do. But at the same time, what makes life so rich and precious, knowing that in this form, in this garb, in these abilities, it's finite. So let's do with it what we will and what we can. Let's use it as wisely, as richly as we can. In the 23rd Psalm, you know the words we say, yea, though I walk in the valley or through the valley of the shadow of death. Let me ask you, when have you and I not walked through the valley of the shadow of death? Not a day of our lives. Not a day of our lives have we not had the shadow of mortality over our lives that are so beautiful and rich in relationship and mitzvot and doing. But always we have this little awareness, the shadow. It's beautiful and it's powerful and sometimes it's terrifying. But sometimes it gives what we know we need to change, a distinct urgency. I remember working on change management projects with companies, and I realized something I learned pretty early on was that nothing happens without urgency. Nothing, nobody changes without urgency. That's the power of the doctor appointment. That's the power of the ER visit, the cardiologist visit. That's the power of those moments that say, you took my breath away. I have to change. I need to do something different. Otherwise, we carry on as we did because we're creatures of habit. And the habits that served us or didn't, they're the habits of our lives. The things that we repeat become the language of our being. But sometimes we have to change the language, to change the direction, to change the course and the future of our lives. The great Rav Soloveitchik said, we are Jewish people. We are therefore creative people. The Kotzker Rebbe said, one of the beautiful things is people think the miracle is eternal life, reincarnation, life eternally. That's not the miracle. The miracle is people who give new birth to their lives within their lives. I talked to you last night about a woman. You remember the story, lying emaciated on the carpet of her floor, 2 a.m, picking up the telephone. Auburn Sandstrom. Do you remember that story? Her story of isolation, of loneliness, of lack of hope, of addiction. I didn't tell you that her husband tried at 60 miles an hour on the motorway, on the freeway, to push her and her son out of the car. Maybe that was too much for one evening. But also what I didn't tell you was that her son went on to graduate cum laude from Princeton. What I didn't tell you was there are pivot points in our lives. There are shifting points. We just have to notice them. Some people call them epiphanies, awakenings, aha moments. There are these moments and there are these words and there are these conversations that can actually shift us to be the other person. The lighter, brighter, more positive, more generous, more generative, more caring person than we've ever been. The more thoughtful, the more time-giving, the more sincere, the more honest with ourselves and others. All of that can happen now in a moment of your life and mine. All of us have decision points. We get to be the architects of not the past. We get to be readers of that, but we get to be architects of the future. It has not been built. If you're an ancient Greek, you don't believe what I said. If you're a Jew, you don't. The ancient Greeks believed that everything was foretold and finished. Plato believed that there were some human beings that were inherently gold and some that were silver and some that were bronze. Aristotle believed that there were some people who were born to serve and other people who were born to be served. Oedipus, before he was born, even before the life of his father, Laius, before they were born, the oracle at Delphi already told their fate, but that's not a Jewish story. We rejected that. We rejected Hellenism, not only because they came to our land and tried to vanquish, destroy this, our culture, our Torah, our heritage, our religion, but because they tried to replace it with that. The idea that you and I can't be recreating and changing our lives. God forbid. God forbid we should buy into a moment of that belief. God forbid that you or your kids or grandkids should feel for a moment that there's truth in the statement that I am what I am. God forbid. And many other words that come to mind. It's just not true. You are what you've been to this moment. But now what are you going to be? God looks to you and only sees potential. You might look to yourself and only see a past. I mentioned on Rosh Hashanah day or evening something about the idea of pinning other people like butterflies to a wall that they can no longer move. God forbid that we should do that to ourselves and our minds and our hearts. God forbid that we shouldn't cultivate creativity, generativity in each other, the belief that every single one of us, with all of our foibles, with all of our failings, with all of our inherent divine, beautiful fragility, that any of us should believe that we can't and shouldn't strive toward change, toward being better. So what do we do on Yom Kippur, a day in which we wear white? I don't wear this because it's flattering, by the way. I don't think it's flattering. I wear it because the tradition says, think about yourself in this light as mortal. Stand before this community with that realization because they share it with you. We have to indulge in that. We have to spend time with it. We saw a TV show recently, my wife and I won't recommend it, I don't want to say. It's very good and interesting, though, where people go on a retreat. Some people already know the one I'm talking about with Nicole Kidman. And what they do is they dig graves, and there's a certain point where everybody has to lie in their own grave. Okay, remember there's also a Korean story of a practice in South Korea where people would get into coffins. They'd pay to do that, imagine. They would go to a place like you and I might go to a spa, and they'd go to a place to practice mortality, to see what it is to fit and to feel and to be and to stay and to linger in that place of what is and what was and what could be, because then, God willing, the cover comes off and they resume their lives. We get to create from this moment on what would be remembered. by us and about us. We get to create a legacy now. Now, Yom Kippur Day, today, we get to create a legacy with a power and an urgency that's never existed in the year, maybe never in our lives. A few months ago, I was doing funerals week after week, sometimes several in a week, and thankfully they weren't many of them COVID. One of them that stood out to me and struck me was a woman by the name of Rosalie who used to sit out here with her family. And I looked at my notes, my pre-funeral notes from her family. And I looked at the words that I jotted down in our conversations. And I want to read some of them to you. Aside from the fact that she was remembered for loving golf and tennis and classical music, listen to her legacy as remembered by her children and grandchildren. Positive, that's a choice. Loving, it's a choice. Big-hearted, it's a decision. Assured, assertive, loved her family, loved life. Open-minded, so bright. The matriarch, non-judgmental, that's a choice. Selfless, a choice. Peaceful, always a smile on her face. Constant laughter. Grateful, a choice. Humble, outgoing, funny, communicative, an integral part of her grandchildren's lives, a choice. Always giving, a choice. Volunteering, a choice. Learning, a choice. She had great respect, they said, for Judaism, for Jewish tradition. She loved this synagogue. That's Rosalie's legacy. And I know at least one of her family members is here. But many of you knew her. And what I want to say about her is what I want to say about you and me. Legacies aren't created on the basis of incidental moments. It just doesn't work that way. Being generous once doesn't mean that people will remember you as generous. Being open-hearted occasionally doesn't warrant the words open-hearted in your eulogy. It's consistency. Not complete consistency, because none of us are that consistent, but it's striving to make our values apparent, to wear our values, if not our hearts, on our sleeves, so that it will be realized by the people who know us, she changed, he changed. She was grumpy, but she became positive. We don't know why, we don't know when, but there was a certain point in her life when her attitude changed. He became courageous. I don't know what happened, but courage somehow entered his being. She became soulful and quiet and contemplative. I don't know why. Maybe it was a service, a book she read. But at age 57 or 97 or 43, something changed in her. What changed in people is what we allow and want to change in ourselves. We get to make those choices. I want to suggest that on this Yom Kippur, you spend time with your words. Is it generous? Is that one of yours? Is it soulful? Is it thoughtful? Is it caring? Is it compassionate? Is it volunteering? Is it big-hearted? Is it passionate? Is it loving? Is it communicating well? Is it grateful? Those can be your legacy and mine. We just need to choose. We get to choose. That's the beauty of being us. We get to choose the future. We get to decide, you and I get to decide what will be said about us. I think about Auburn Sandstrom and one particular aspect of her life as I just glance out and see people and their stories, as I always do in these sermons. And I think about a woman whose story could have ended that night. And you and I know people whose stories ended in such nights as hers. Addiction, despair. But she decided to change her story. A few weeks ago, I was invited to a birthday party. It was the 40th birthday party for a man who I know is over 40, so I knew there was something wrong. I think of him as being pretty honest, so this is a little inconsistent with his character. But Artie told me I was invited to his 40th sobriety birthday. And I thought there's nothing that's going to stop me other than COVID from being there to celebrate that. Nothing. So reschedule it. because 40 years of sobriety is miraculous. It means having a faith in yourself and in God and in your story and in what might come into your story that you can't have on those dark nights unless a pinhole of light enters your life and you allow yourself to be moved and changed by it. I said many years ago that firemen and police officers and all those people and soldiers and Superman have always been my heroes, but when I came to VOS 25 years ago, my stories of heroes changed. I no longer look only to them. I look to people in the 12-step recovery community. I look to people who say, yesterday I struggled and today I struggle, but today I've added a day to my life and a year and a year and a year. These are heroes. These are worthy of you and your children gathering at their feet and saying, how? Because I have far smaller struggles and I need to know how you do that. I need to spend time seeing the light that emanates from you and you and you and you, because it's truly a gift to us. I'll conclude this conversation, if not a sermon, by saying thank you. Thank you to you, thank you to you, to you, to you, to you, to all of you who for 25 years have taught me so much about being fragile, beautiful human beings. Can't thank you enough. Can't thank you enough for this journey. I want to invite everybody to conclude the service. Please go home. You can stay here, you can walk around, you can do whatever you like. We'll just need to leave the sanctuary. What I want to invite you to do is to be here at 1:30 for 1 hour of further inspiration by people from your community who will tell you their stories. Remarkable, 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 heroic stories. Gmar Chatima Tova. May all of you be inscribed in this book of precious, beautiful, joyous life. Thank you. For those of you on live stream, wherever you are, I want to remind you that we continue at 3:30 on the dot with Pastor Dudley Rutherford. He's going to be here to share his words, and we'll share our gratitude. So please be here for those of you who can. Invite people who weren't here this morning to be here. Let's be here for him and for all the staff at Shepherd. For those on live stream, I want to remind you that you can make donations anytime to support us. We have our Yom Kippur campaign. It's critically important we do this. I want to say one last thing in the business of the synagogue. Soon you're going to hear that we're doing something to take the weight, the burden off membership dues and individual donors, and that is to create, we've already created now, a legacy endowment fund. And what that will do if we contribute to it through our own wealth and ability, but also through our estate plans, through our wills and trusts, it will mean that there will be less burden on individuals who need this synagogue and will, I promise you, continue to need this synagogue into the future. It'll allow that to fund our future, our present and our future. So you'll hear more. Now you have an inkling of what it'll be. Let me invite everybody to take their belongings, and we'll see you at 1:30. We'll see you at 3:30. Of course, we'll see you for Yizkor, the end of the day. Gmar Chatima Tova.